Welcome back to Stab the Dragon Productions for episode number 193. We have begun a mini-series on Canadian whiskies, and last time we looked at Seagram's VO, a Canadian blend. Tonight, we're going to examine Crown Royal Fine Deluxe Blended Canadian Whiskey. This is the #1 best-selling whiskey in America, according to a lot of surveys, and it literally has a royal past. So this is a worthy object of our study. And the current president-elect in America, Donald J. Trump, is talking about making Canada the 51st state, imposing tariffs, which may include a hike in the price of whiskeys. And then the PM of Canada, Justin Trudeau, just resigned this last week. So it seems like all things Canadian are in the news. So of course, we should do a study of Crown Royal. Now just the facts. Introduced in 1939, Seagram's Crown Royal was a gift to King George VI of Great Britain when he was visiting Canada for the first time. The first royal visit to Canada. Imagine that. The company has been owned by Diageo, a British company, since 2001 and is the #1 selling whiskey in America. This is an 80 proof blended Canadian whiskey that cost me $24.99 at Goody Goody in December of 2024 here in Fort Worth, Texas. As a Canadian whiskey, it has to be mashed, fermented, and aged all in Canada, and aged for not less than 3 years. This whiskey is a non-age stated, so in other words, it's got some 3-year-old whiskey in here, but it probably also has a lot of older whiskey in here. It may have caramel coloring because that's allowed in Canadian whiskey. Some flavorings can be added as well in Canadian whiskeys. Tasting notes. The website says hints of vanilla, oak, butterscotch give way to notes of cloves and nutmeg with a smooth finish. I get hints of maple syrup, tobacco, leather, oak, caramel for sure, maybe some of that spiciness, cloves and nutmeg. I think I get some of that spiciness, but for me to identify those specifically, I really can't. At 80 proof, these notes leave me wanting more. It comes across as just a tad bit weak. My total score for this whiskey is an 81. My letter grade, which emphasizes drinkability, is a B+. My recommendation. This is a great beginner whiskey that many people hold on to as their lifelong go-to whiskey. It's a very good choice if you're thinking about entering the world of whiskey coming from vodka-based cocktails, beer, or wine. This whiskey is so incredibly popular that I think if you have a home bar and entertain folks, you probably ought to have this on hand, even if maybe you have moved on to bigger, bolder things. Now let's look at the details. History. In 1857, William Hespeler and George Randall built a steam-powered flour mill in Waterloo, Canada, and called it Granite Mills. In 1864, the growing mill and distillery hired a young Joseph Seagram to join the company and manage the books while Hespeler went on an extensive tour in Europe. By 1869, young Seagram had married his boss's daughter, and by 1883, Seagram owned the company. I guess that's how that works. In 1911, the 70-year-old Seagram allowed his son Edward and Thomas to join as partners, and they renamed the whiskey business Joseph E. Seagram and Sons. In 1916, the Ontario Temperance Act shut down a lot of the whiskey business, but not entirely. Then in 1920, American Prohibition began, and hard times befell the industry. In 1927, the Seagram brothers had to take the company public to survive, and by 1928, they merged with Samuel Bronfman's Distillers Corporation. Samuel Bronfman of Montreal. And Bronfman gradually assumed control of the firm. Bronfman and his family were in the hotel business and entertainment business, so that's how they got into the liquor business besides. Now, the Temperance Act in Manitoba, each of the provinces of Canada had their own Temperance Act, and some were harsher than others. But the Temperance Act in Manitoba affected their business, but still allowed for the manufacture, transport, and sales, but you could only sell outside the province. So you can't sell liquor inside the province, you got to be outside. And the laws also allowed for a mail order business with whiskey. So the Bronfmans managed to maintain their liquor business during the temperance years, and they may have been involved in a little bit of bootlegging across the Great Lakes into America. But the laws got increasingly harsher, so Sam Bronfman moved his business to Montreal, Quebec. That's French Canada, where the laws were less difficult because the French. And he purchased a distillery in Louisville, Kentucky, and had it shipped piece by piece to Canada, naming their business Distillers Corporation Limited. Bronfman changed from the style of making and selling young whiskey during these temperance years and began stockpiling his whiskey to age. And in 1928, again, he purchased Seagram's, or merged with Seagram's, and eventually gained control. In 1933, American Prohibition ended, and Bronfman and Seagram's had a huge stock of well-aged whiskey for sale. Canadian and Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey flooded the market in America, and they were the leading sellers. In preparation for the Canadian tour by King George VI and family, Bronfman had his distillery make a new whiskey of high quality, calling it Crown Royal Fine Deluxe, sheathed in a purple bag. There you go, the purple bag. And they sell this purple bag with the whiskey to this day. And the Crown royal family liked it, and it became a thing. It became the most popular whiskey in Canada. It became available in the U.S. in 1964. And then after Sam Bronfman's death in 1971, the second and third generations of the family started diversifying the company, buying other things, and made some bad business choices. And by 2000, they had to divest themselves of almost everything. So the whiskey business was sold to Pernod Ricard, French company, and then quickly resold to Diageo in 2000 or 2001. I've seen different dates for that. So Crown has been a leading whiskey in America for many years, alternating with Jack Daniels for first or second place in sales for a long time. I could not track down exactly how long, but many, many years. So for history, 5 out of 5 points for the Crown Royal. Bottle label and marketing. Now, Sam Bronfman knew what he was doing in making a beautiful chiseled glass crown-shaped bottle covered in the purple bag. There you go, the purple bag. One of the most classy, easily recognizable bottles out there. Now, some purists complain about the screw-on cap, right? Doesn't have a cork, kind of a plastic, hard plastic screw-on cap. But I kind of like that cap, actually. I think it's fitting. The label is classy, but not actually very informative. You know, you don't get, you know, what the composition is here. All you get's the proof, and that's about it. The box and bag that I've got are NFL season 2024 Dallas Cowboys. There you go. Limited edition. They market their stuff that way. And Dallas Cowboys had a sorry season, so oh well. I do not recall any advertisements for Crown Royal. Now I've got the sign right above my left shoulder here, but as a kid, I remember advertisements in newspapers, magazines, TV on the billboards beside the road. Black Velvet, Cutty Sark, Seagram's VO. I remember those ads, but I've not seen the ads for Crown. I just haven't. So I don't know. Bottle label and marketing. 5 out of 5 points. I'm really a fan of the bottle. Composition. As many as 50 whiskeys go into this blend. I can't even imagine that. I mean, it's like the big blends, like Johnny Walker. Sometimes it has 40 blends or 30 blends, whiskeys in the blend. So I just can't imagine doing that. But that's the art of blending. I mean, a lot of people poo-poo blends and say, I don't want that. I want a single malt or I want a bourbon, whatever. Blends are incredibly difficult to come up with. And so there's a lot of work and science that goes into that. So I respect that. This whiskey comes from the town of Gimli in Canada. Gimli, Manitoba, on the shores of Lake Winnipeg. Does that name Gimli resonate with anybody? There's a Viking history. In fact, there's like a Viking statue there in Gimli. It was originally settled by Icelandic immigrants. People from Iceland settled in Canada at Gimli. There you go. The name is used by J.R.R. Tolkien for one of the leading dwarves in Lord of the Rings. So there you go, all the way from Gimli. So this is a dwarf whiskey. This is a Viking whiskey, Canadian whiskey. There you go. That just adds some color to this, right? The whiskey is made using column stills, not pot stills. And Canadian whiskey is made very differently from American. In America, we mix the grains in the mash and ferment them all together and age them just together. In Canada, they ferment and age them separately, then take them out of the casks and blend them. And that's one of the key differences between Canadian and American whiskeys. And that's why most Canadian whiskeys are called blended whiskeys, because that's just how they do it. In American bourbon, you've got to have a mash bill of 51% corn. In American rye, it's got to be 51% rye. And they must be aged in new oak charred barrels. Canadian whiskeys can be aged in a variety of casks. If you've got 50 whiskeys in here, some of them are going to be in new casks, some in old casks, some in charred casks, some in raw casks. I mean, some in ex-bourbon casks, ex-wine casks, who knows? That's how loosey-goosey the Canadian whiskey laws are. So I am reasonably certain that most Canadian whiskeys have some casks that have been used to store maple syrup, because I always get maple flavor in Canadian whiskeys. Now, maybe they add some maple, maybe it's just my imagination, I don't know. And this is not a complaint. I love it. I mean, the maple flavor that I get in Crown Royal or other Canadian whiskeys is wonderful. Canadian whiskeys also, you can add caramel coloring. And so chances are, as dark as this is, I gave it a 3. That's got caramel coloring in there. And they can add flavoring. You can add certain percentage of other stuff besides whiskey in there. And that's just Canadian law. So what is inside this bottle? I have no idea. And so when I evaluate composition, there's some negativity that goes there. All I can say is the youngest whiskey in here is 3 years old, but much of it's going to be older. So for composition, only 9 out of 15 points. Appearance. This whiskey has a 3 for visual appearance. There you go. And that's just my 5-point scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I tend to prefer darker whiskeys, But this is a 3. This is kind of an average. Nose. Some faint sweetness. Maybe a little bit of oak. My nose does not work very well, and so smelling whiskeys is a problem. So I'm going to have to give it my generic score of 7 points. Sometimes with rye or Texas whiskeys or Scotch, I can smell pretty good. Taste. This is mildly sweet. It's not super sweet, and it tastes natural or not artificial. When I taste something like Old Forester 86 or Old Forester 100, I get an artificial sweetness. Benchmark, I get an artificial sweetness. This is a good sweetness, but it's not super sweet. It's mild. Caramel, yeah. Notes of maple syrup. Oak, yeah. There's an oak presence here. This is it's got a nice touch of wood. Spices. It's hard for me to identify different spices, but there's a spicy element to it. So there's probably some rye involved in the mash bill. I get some leather and tobacco notes, but those are faint. And again, everything in here is faint because it's just a weaker whiskey. Not much depth. It gives hints of nice things, but only hints. And so it leaves me wanting something more, something richer. Now, there's nothing negative here at all. I mean, that's one of the secrets to making whiskey for the masses is don't make anything negative. And so this is utterly, completely positive, easy sipping. 21 points for taste. Mouthfeel, burn, and finish. It's got a medium mouthfeel. I wouldn't call it thin, although I think some people would. It's an appropriate burn for an 80 proofer. In fact, it's very mild. It's very smooth. Easy sipping. The finish is medium. Some would say weak, but I think it's more medium. The flavors do fade, and I'm left with just the tingle of the alcohol, but it's a pleasant tingle. So there's no bitterness. There's no negative on the mouthfeel, burn, or finish. And it's suitable for a new drinker of whiskey. I don't think the burn's going to scare anybody off. So 12 points, 12 out of 15 for mouthfeel, burn, and finish. Neat or mixer? I definitely prefer it neat. This is an easy sipper. Now, as a mixer with Diet Coke here, all right? So I've got my Diet Coke and Crown. The Crown is pretty muted in there. You don't taste it much, but I do get still a little bit of the tannin from the oak. And that's actually a good flavor to add to the Coke. I tend to think that Jack and Coke is better. Rum and Coke is better. There's nothing negative here. It's just the flavors are really kind of muted. I've got a friend at the American Legion I go to, and he always orders Crown and Coke. That's his drink, and he's older than me. But Crown and Coke, that's it. And so this is a absolutely fine, simple cocktail that anybody can do at home. What I would really like to try is a Crown and Crown. Get a Royal Crown Cola and try it with Crown. So have a Crown and Crown. There you go. So neat or mixture, I'm going to give it 5 points. Price, value, and availability. Total Wine has this for $24.99, as does Goody Goody. Specs $23.97. This whiskey is available just about everywhere. Value. In the whiskey community online, Canadian whiskey is generally disparaged. Whiskey snobbery is the thing. If you can't get the latest cask strength single malt from Scotland, then you don't know your whiskey. I hate that attitude. To me, it's ridiculous. I find Crown Royal to be a great value. It is an enjoyable whiskey for a good price. At 80 proof, it does leave me wanting more, so I gravitate towards the Crown Black at 90 proof. But the proof is in the sales, and this whiskey is the most popular whiskey in Canada and America. It's hard to beat that. So 9 out of 10 for price, value, and availability. Bonus, 0 to 5 points is available here. 5 points. Because I like the whiskey. I love the history. I mean, it's made in Gimli, Canada, really. And I really like the bottle. So bonus points, 5. My total score, therefore, is an 81. There is nothing wrong with this whiskey. It's tasty, but 80 proof for me is just a tad too weak. So the good flavors seem to be muted, and you get hints of goodness, and you're left wanting more. My letter grade drinkability is a B+. If I was ever, someplace and people offered, hey, I'll get you a Crown Royal. Sure, absolutely. I would never turn this drink down. And if somebody offered me a free bottle, hey, I'll give you a bottle. It depends. If I've got room available, if I don't have any Crown on hand at the time, I would take that. But, is this going to be one of my favorites? No, but it's one that I would, always have on hand, I think. So recommendation. For many people, this is their introductory whiskey, and then they never leave. They become a fan forever. This is a great whiskey for beginners or a lifelong favorite, either way. It's tasty and easy sipping. It's not harsh. Many folks think of bourbon as too harsh and Scotch as too funky. And there's a harshness to bourbon, absolutely, that's inherently a part of bourbon. And same with single malt scotches. There's a harsh line through there. This whiskey does not have that harshness. Now, it does have alcohol, and so there's a slight burn, a tingle, but it's not harsh. Crown is like a dessert in a glass. If you're considering trying whiskey for the first time, I highly recommend Crown Royal. If, however, you have started your whiskey journey with Jack Daniels or Jim Beam or Wild Turkey, in general, I would say you should approach this looking for something different than bourbon. This is smooth, sweet, and mild, with a touch of maple syrup on pancakes. So it's not a bourbon. Don't look for this like a bourbon. It's not a Scotch. Don't look for this like another Scotch. It is distinctly Canadian. And all the other Canadian whiskeys I've had, there's kind of a similarity. So you can tell, hey, this is Canadian. If you have a home bar and entertain people often, I think this is a must-have. My conclusion then. Cheers to Gimli, my favorite battle axe wielding dwarf, and a nice little town in Canada. Next time, I hope to sample and evaluate Crown Royal Black, the 90 proof edition. This is Stab the Dragon, out here.